we must realize that now in the world, if we're not contextual to the individual, and that doesn't mean making our messages contextual. That means a completely different idea of marketing, void of this idea of messages. And that's what marketing has to shift to, is seeing that their role is no longer just a role of creating messages to tell the world about the products they have to sell. It's about creating contextual experiences which become the products themselves in the customer's lives.
Welcome to the Magnificent Marketing Podcast, where we interview the top marketing experts in the world and keep you up to date on all the changes and best practices to help you grow your business and stay on the cutting edge. Welcome to the show. Hello, everyone. I'm here today with Mathew Sweezey, and Mathew is one of the new breed of marketing thought leaders who was born digital, raised mobile, and taught to embrace rather than fear analytics. His passion for our new era of marketing comes through each and every presentation he gives, and his easygoing style helps him speak to audiences rather than above their heads. And today, we are going to be talking about, if marketing must change, what must it become? Mathew, how are you doing today?
Hey, doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've been wanting to get you on the podcast ever since I saw you speak a couple years ago at CM World on marketing automation. It was one of the most information-packed presentations I think I've ever come across. I don't know if you remember it or not, but you gave a ton of information, and it was on the cutting edge at the time of automation. So really looking forward to talking this out with you, because marketing is ever-changing. I know that's always has been the case, and I think always will be the case, but I think we are in the midst of a lot of change. So before we dig in here, I would like to just have you touch on why you think this is happening. Why is marketing changing so much right now, as well as maybe why you think it should change?
All great questions. So let's just take a quick stab at this one. So marketing always changes based on the environments, right? So if something changes within the environment, that then changes how things interact within the environment. And as we've gone through time, just over recently, you know, we've seen changes such as the change from analog to digital, the change from digital to social, and all those different changes. What I really focused on and what I've really been working on, and what I'll be writing about in my upcoming book, is the idea of those are environmental changes. And yes, they are all important, but those changes within those environments were all still limited. So let me give you a real quick example. When we moved from analog to digital, we were still in a limited media environment, meaning that there were still very few producers of media during that point in time, right? They just had digital means of creation. It was still businesses. You know, there's still three barriers to creation: distribution, and consumption. As we've now moved forward, we now have entered what I call the infinite era, which is essentially a flip-flop. So what used to be a media environment controlled by very few people, just the businesses or those with the ability to create and distribute media, now is flip-flop, where anyone in the world actually has the ability to create, distribute, and consume media with zero friction. I mean, just think about the simple statistic that there are over 6 billion people on the planet now with access to a cell phone. And if you put that in comparison, there are only 5 billion people with electricity, right? So it's one of the most ubiquitous things in the world now is to create content. Yeah, it's totally crazy.
That's insane.
But then you think about that, what that actually means is that what marketing now must become is very different than what it ever was. And so the change that we're actually going through is not just a change in an iterative process. It's not just all right, well, how do we take what we've known and how do we shift it? What we have to realize is that because the era has completely shifted, and by the way, this is the first time in the history of the world that the media era has entered a new era, right? We've entered lots of new environments, but all those environments were limited, right? Limited to creation, distribution, and consumption. This is the first time all of those foundations have been wiped away. So the change that we're really talking about now is not just a change in how do we move from, you know, analog to social. It's a change on how do we rethink what the word marketing means in a world where the businesses are no longer the owners or the controllers of the entire media environment. And so that's really what we're talking about right now is that's the change that marketing must go through. So this changes really the foundations of what marketing is and what marketing means, rather than just changing tactics, approaches, or channels.
So when did you realize that all, this has all happened? Was it like an aha moment, or, was it driven by data and analytics, or
Yeah,
a combination of both?
great question. So it really started out, and I was trying to, it ended up with data analytics. It started with me asking a couple questions, and those couple questions really were starting to try to figure out what is going to be the cost of driving demand in the future, right? So if you read all the writing on the walls, right, if you look at when Google AdWords came out, it was extremely cheap to use, but as it progressed, it became very expensive based on your keywords, right? It's hundreds of times greater than it was when it first came out. If you follow that same analogy and you look at a lot of the other major things that have come out, right, social media has gone from organic to paid. And so a lot of these other things are moving that same way. So my question was trying to figure out how much is it really going to cost to drive demand in the future? Will it be greater or less than it was in the past? And to answer that question, what I started doing is started gathering a lot of data and analyzing a lot of these different things together. And what I found was something pretty startling, and that was the actual shifting of different eras. And that was the first time it had ever been actually identified. And so Harvard, I pitched the idea to Harvard, and now I'm working with Harvard Business Press to produce this book on the future of marketing based on the assumption that we have moved into a completely different era. And when you look at the data and you run the data, this is what you see. You see from 1900 up until the current point in time, we've always measured this thing called noise, right? And noise in the marketing sense is the creation of messages, right? It's competing messages. And so when we say, what does it take for our message to break through the noise? What that means is, what does it take our message to break through all the other competing messages? And see, in the limited era, what that meant was, what does it take our advertisement to compete with other advertisements? Now, if you go back to what I just said a second ago, and you realize that now the largest creators of media in the world are individuals, not businesses, what it takes to break through the noise is something totally different, because the noise is a totally different substance. So now the noise is not other advertisements and messages, it's other dynamic experiences, other content from individuals. And the scale is vastly different. When you have a very small set of producers, just businesses, you have a very confined environment that is only made of their messages, because nobody else can create media inside of that environment. Now, when you shift to the infinite environment and you realize a couple of basic things. One is there's so much media being created that it's inhumanly possible to actually manage. So now individuals are relying on artificial intelligence, algorithms, and filters to help filter their world to surface up what is the most contextual experience for them at the moment. And what we have to realize is our messages were never contextual, and they were never wanted by individuals. So simply iterating on how to make messages better is a failed assumption of marketing in the new era, because those algorithms, filters, and individuals don't want messages. And if they don't want messages, none of those algorithms and filters will filter them up, no matter how much we tweak them or how many different channels we put them on them. I just want to pause real quick and bring into this conversation a conversation I had with Doc Searles not too long ago. Now, for those of you that may not know Doc, Doc was a co-author of a book called Clue Train Manifesto. Also wrote another book that came out in 2012, helped start and works with the Beckman Center of Innovation at Harvard, an extremely progressive mind in the field of marketing. And what he said in a recent conversation with him, he says, I don't think people realize this, but if you just take this one simple notion into account, and you think about ad blocking technology, there's 600,000 people, or 6 million, whatever, it's a massive number. It's not 600,000, it's massively greater than that. But if you look at that, that is the largest boycott to have ever happened on the face of the planet.
And one way to look at it, yeah.
It's in boycott of marketing messages, right? So we must realize that now in the world, if we're not contextual to the individual, and that doesn't mean making our messages contextual. That means a completely different idea of marketing, void of this idea of messages. And that's what marketing has to shift to, is seeing that there role is no longer just a role of creating messages to tell the world about the products they have to sell. It's about creating contextual experiences which become the products themselves in the customer's lives.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think
about the vision.
yeah, Mark Schaefer touched on this with his content shock a couple years ago, and it looks like you're taking it another step further. And I think this speaks again to you know, a lot of experts that I've personally talked to, a lot of stuff I've continued to read, and yeah, I think there's a lot of shift in the strategy of marketers to front load it. Front load your time, front load the strategy and the, you know, thinking through everything. Stop just producing all this stuff. Like stop and strategize ahead of time and really try to cut through, because all this is happening, because it's getting harder and harder to reach people, because there's so much more content or messaging out there. And I think I've heard you talk, you know, you've identified this the problem or challenge, I guess. And I've heard you talk to kind of what's happened with this is modern media, it's shifted consumers' psychology, physiology, desires, and logic to motivate their actions. Can you explain this a little bit further, and like what's happening specifically in and around those areas, and then how from there we can utilize this knowledge to produce better experiences?
Yeah, so let's think about this in a pretty simplistic way, right? So environments dictate all things, all life within the environment, right? The physical environment, if we didn't have an atmosphere made up of oxygen, we wouldn't survive, right? We'd have had to adapt in a different way. So if you now consider that the consumers are now operating in an environment of infinite access to infinite media, it then changes the way that they make decisions. And the whole point of marketing is to help understand how to persuade and motivate. Well, if people make decisions in different ways based on the environment, we must understand that the processes of motivation and persuasion are vastly different as a result. So when you said just a second ago that marketers need to stop and think, they do, but what they think they need to do is wrong. Because if they say, well, this is what we've always done, how do we do this in a different way? They're asking the wrong question. Let me give you a couple of examples. Right. So if you sit there and say the age-old adage of sex sells, right? That's been a basic, fundamental aspect of marketing forever, right? And you can go back and you can look at the Budweiser titillating examples of the girls in bikinis with Budweiser across them. I mean, that was the mainstay of Budweiser's advertising up until today. And you then realize that if you produce that message and you try to force that into the environment, it's not going to get through, and it's not going to motivate or persuade. I mean, this is even, it's clear because Budweiser even puts out statements that their marketing and advertising strategy has failed, and they have to come up with new ones. So the idea of sex sells worked in a limited media environment, when all you had to do was grab somebody's attention. And to grab someone's attention, yes, sex was a great way to do it, because if they pick up the magazine and they're flipping through and they see something, you can't engage with somebody unless you grab their attention first. Now we live in a very different world, which is dynamic, which consumers don't have to rely on you. So here's the second idea, right? The idea that being top of mind is a great way to motivate and persuade. But the point I would like to make to you is, what mind are we now trying to be top of, right? So think about telephone numbers. Consumers don't remember things because there is a better, more powerful way to remember things, and that is digital devices. We're actually offloading our memory to those devices. So when a consumer goes to make a decision, in the limited era, they had three sources of information, right? And to make a decision, you have information. This is very critical. So you had your memory, you had the products you could look at and read what it said, or you had somebody else that you could ask, right? The phone a friend, ask the person next to you, whatever you want to use that as. And so of those three, the most persuasive is your human memory. Because if you have a preconceived notion, that is very powerful in making decisions and what you believe and what you think and how you act. So that is why you saw a lot of work on repetition, backdooring your way into consumers' minds. The notion that no press is bad press. because as long as they hear our name, when they go to make a decision, they'll have information in the back of their head and they'll know our name. They may not know the reason they know our name, but they'll know our name, and at least that is enough to say, hey, I've heard of them before, I can trust them on some level. But let's take that same idea now of a decision-making process and this idea of no press, there's no such thing as bad press, right? If you go to Google, and let's now put this in context of the modern environment, the infinite world, and a consumer today. A consumer today goes to make a decision. They have something else. They have a mobile device in their hand, and we just stated there are more people in the world with that mobile device in their hand than there are people that have actual electricity in their home, right? So everyone, this is ubiquitous across the planet. If we go to make a decision now, we don't rack our brains. Instead, what do? David, if you need to go make a decision, where's the first place that you go?
Normally Google.
Yeah, everyone goes to Google. And you ask Google a question. And Google then brings back contextual answers specifically tailored to you, right? Now, here's what's important. In the old days, when you asked a question, that bad press was not brought up. But that bad press is highly contextual to your question. So Google surfaces that bad press in the form of reviews and ratings. So let's say that you then do a search and you find that a place has a review or rating of a 2.5. That instantly changes your perception, motivation, and persuasion, and you just instantly cancel that service out, whatever it may be, whether it's a store, restaurant, product, whatever it was. And so that idea of bad press is good and there's no such thing as bad press is completely failed because it lives in the infinite environment. It then becomes combined into part of that experience and becomes a rating and review. So then when you ask that question, you're given that contextual answer, and that contextual answer has that bad press, which then says, I'm not using it. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go to that store, restaurant, whatever it may be. And so the decision-making process is very different. So we don't rely on our brains as much as we do as this infinite media store accessing it because it's instant and they're trusted answers. Is that a good example?
Yeah. No, I completely hear what you're saying, and I think it leads to, you know, the new book you're reading. Kudos on that, by the way. I mean, you're pitching something that gets accepted by Harvard. It's one of the more impressive things I've heard. So that's amazing. But that kind of leads to your title is the content versus context, and you've explained a bit about the context. But what are the 4 levels of context that you talk about? I think that will help us lead into, again, I think we've identified the situation, and then now love to kind of pull out of you, okay, now how do we apply this? How do we apply this on our plans? And I don't want to say messages, but that's part of, you know, the whole strategy behind the overall what we're putting out there. So why don't you dig into the 4 levels of context, and I think that'll lead into some actionable, you know, ideas, I guess, at least.
Cool. All right, so let's break this down real quick. So if you're looking at context, it's a hierarchical structure just like the hierarchy of needs from Maslow. And it's got a pyramid, and at the bottom is availability, right? Something cannot be contextual if it first can't be there. Once something is there, the next layer of context is personal. On top of that, then is shared between authenticity and purpose. And then at the top is all things combined. So if an experience is there, it is personal, it is both authentic and purposeful, it is the highest level of context. Now, there's 2 important things to understand. The more contextual something is, the more likely it is to be available to an individual. Because you got to remember, in the infinite media world, we rely heavily on algorithms and filters. And these algorithms and filters are looking for context to surface up an experience or an engagement. Now, let's break each one of these down into practical what they mean. And let's start with available. We can't be there. Availability in the modern world means a lot of things. It means simply being there. And we have to realize there's a base level of technology that has to exist to make these experiences possible. The main difference between the limited era and the infinite era is this idea of dynamicism, right? We live in a dynamic world where anything can be created instantly. So a really good example is your website. If someone comes to your website and it's a static website, you have information there, but it's not contextual to that individual. Let me give you a really good data set on this one. So when we look at it, the average number of page views that a person looks at on a website is 1.7, which means What they expect is that the moment they land, you understand them and change that website to be personal to them, not just changing it for their name, but exactly what is contextual to what they want. And that's a great example of both availability and the notion of personal. And so that's why you see a heavy investment in, what I would call the basics of a system of context, a CRM, a website that has the ability to dynamically change based on the individual behaviors, a marketing automation tool, which then can take lots of different data and then do if-then statements, such as, if person has done this, then we change this to give this offer. That's some basic examples. And so that is a foundation that we have to have of context. And so that's a technological foundation. Then the next level is the level of personal, which doesn't mean, like I said, just changing something to say, hey, John, in the subject line of your email. It means it has to actually be a personal experience to them. Let me give you a really good example of personal experience. Dunkin' Donuts, they're in the coffee space. And the competitive advantage that they believe they have right now is their loyalty rewards program. It's got over 5 million members in it. They see this as a high competitive advantage in the coffee space because of the first thing of personal, right? They have permission from these people that log into this application to provide them with personal experiences. And these personal experiences are not pushed messages. What they provide through their application is on-the-go ordering, 24-hour order ahead, fast service lines for people that are members of their loyalty program. So their loyalty program is providing personal experiences, not a way to push messages to them. Once you get past those two things, we get to the levels of authentic and purposeful. And this is really different in the modern
quick, Matthew,
world.
can I interject real quick before we move on to that? Because you said some great stuff, but I wanted to try to have this apply to the small and the large business owner. I think with large businesses that have a little bit bigger budget, because some of these dynamic website opportunities, they come with a pretty fairly nice monthly sticker price to be able to implement. Same with dynamically personalizing emails, and then even the know-how. I mean, you're not going to know. You're going to probably need somebody to help you out with it. But even so, you still need just the basic levels of entry are fairly high. Now, if you are a medium to large size business, pay strict attention to what Matthew just said, because the opportunities and whatever you're spending money on should definitely be shifted that direction for these personalized experiences. And you can make it happen with, modest, relatively speaking, modest budgets for a medium to large business. But for people who can't afford, those entry-level, budget spends, and you might have touched on this already, though, but I wanted to see if you had anything else to say. You mentioned loyalty programs. I think that's definitely a way that the small business owner can create experiences by creating a loyalty program and then just speaking to this specific set or your client base individually on their own in a macro level, but a micro list. So do you have anything else, any other pointers? I know you work with big brands, but have you ever seen anybody on limited budget or any other ideas how they can personalize these experiences?
Yes, you need technology to have the complete dynamic experience across the entire touch point, but that doesn't mean that you can't, and I don't want to use the term cobble together something, but you just need to look at things in a different way, right? What is personal? Personal is also a personal message that you reach out to somebody with. There's nothing stopping you from keeping a list of people and saying, every week I need to make sure I drop a personal note to all of my loyal customers on Facebook, or make sure I engage with them on social media once a week with all my loyal people, right? So those are really basic examples.
But those are good examples. Those are great examples, though, Matthew, because you either have budget or you have bandwidth. And you can't cry that you don't have either, because if you don't have either, then there's a bigger problem. So, yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, you say it's a small example, but I just wanted to stop you and emphasize, everyone listening out there that doesn't have the budget for this, you have the time. You just need to know where to spend it, and spend it this way. Do create just, notes for yourself, monthly notes, hey, or a weekly note. Hey, reach out to 5 clients today with something personal. Right? So no, I don't want to diminish that idea, because I think it's a fantastic idea, Matthew, for people who don't have the budget. So yeah, continue on. I think that's a bigger point than some might realize. But go ahead.
Yeah. The next thing is authentic and personal. So with that notion of reaching out, when you do create an experience, it has to be an authentic experience. Now, authentic in the digital world and the infinite world does not mean the same thing it does in the old world, right? Because authentic is in reference to a relic. But what is a relic in the world of a tweet? There is no such thing. What is a relic in the world of the infinitely changing internet? It's different and new every moment, so there is no relic to reference. Authentic in the infinite world means what is expected. So what does that person expect? And that is then what is authentic. So whatever is contextual to your relationship, right? If you're a dry cleaner, you probably have a pretty personal understanding of your clientele because you probably talk with them and they probably know you as an individual, right? So an authentic relationship can simply be, oh, hey, John, because you know this person, I'm a big mountain biker, so I always use mountain biking examples, but that this person often goes mountain biking, so simply engaging with a post that they did from mountain biking from you as an individual on social media is a totally fine contextual engagement to that relationship because it does nothing to do about cleaning their clothes. It has everything to do about the relationship that you have between the two people. And so that is what a contextual relationship would be, and that would be authentic. Whereas trying to then use social media to push, discounts for clothes washing or any other type of program may not necessarily be what they want because it's a message, not an experience, and it's not authentic because you're just trying to force, sales upon them, and that's not what they want from social channels. The next thing is purposeful, and so when you think about a purposeful experience, purpose has two levels. First is why is the person there, and the second is what do they get out of it. So why is the person on social media in the first place? What is their purpose for being on social media? Well, it's one of three things, and most likely it is to escape, right? Social media is the modern day smoke break. We go onto social media not because we want to be content creators, but because we just need a digital escape, and that is our escape. Let me give you a really good example. Kronos is a software company, right? And this example could be used across any size of business. And if you look, they share two different types of content on their Facebook page. They share corporate blog posts, and then they also have a series of comics. And the series of comics that they share gets 10 times the engagement on average, 10x of their corporate blog posts. You can look in the exact same day on their Facebook feed, and you will see a corporate blog post, and you will see the comic they shared that morning. And the comic they shared that morning, without fail, will have 10 times the engagement because it fulfills the purpose for the person being on social media in the first place. They did not go there to read your corporate blog post, to find your white paper. They went there to escape. And if you can help them do that, that is contextual to the relationship. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. Yeah, I mean, I think you might have probably cracked open a couple brains there to think, because a lot of people were probably deliberating on, well, this isn't our mission, necessarily, but you see like MailChimp, it's born. Go ahead.
What do you mean by it isn't our mission?
Well, I mean, somebody might be thinking that, that's not necessarily when you went back and you look at what our company's about, and it might not have had humor in it or entertainment or anything like that, just strictly in the initial rule book, I guess. But to kind of go out of that and provide an escape, it feels like, at least like looking at like companies like MailChimp, who's just it's email, right? But if you go look at their social stuff, it's super fun. Their messagings are
let's put a pin in this right here, and I want to address this real quick. I know we don't have a lot of time, but this is extremely important, and you brought up the key to the future of marketing. And the key to the future of marketing, and this is backed by data. So in 2016 at Salesforce, we released the State of Marketing Report, where we were able to actually identify the difference between high-performing marketing organizations and everybody else. The number one trait between all high-performing marketing organizations, and the key difference between them and everybody else, is one thing, and that is that their executives at the highest level buy into a new idea of marketing. They don't buy into the idea that they need marketing, and they don't buy into the idea that they need more marketing. They buy into a new idea of what marketing is. And they also then follow what I call the market, build, sell model, right? If you think about the Industrial Revolution and just how most businesses have been set up, we were taught to build a product, to market that product, and then to sell that product. That's the basic framework of business. But if you look at a company like Tesla, they were able to sell let's see here. So they sold over 400,000 Model 3 Teslas without the car even being built. The car's not even built, and they've already sold 400,000 of them. You want to know how that compares to any other car company? The closest comparison is the Mercedes-Benz C-Class. It's the same price, and it's attacked at the same market. They only sold 86,000 of them. You want to know how much they spent per car on advertising and marketing? Over $900. Tesla spent $6 and sold how many multiples of their entire thing without the product even existing? That is the future of marketing. If your business simply thinks that you take a new idea of marketing and force it into an old business model, you're failed because you have the wrong idea of what marketing is. It's not about better messaging. It's not about more creativity. It's not about more channels. It's a completely different view of what your consumers want and how you fulfill that consumer's need. So the question that you started out this podcast with is, what must marketing become? Well, marketing must become responsive to the needs of the customer. And the needs of the customer are better experiences, not better products. And so that's what we have to create. So the businesses have to shift to a market first, sell second, build third business model. And marketing must be the owners and creators and sustainers of the entire experience. Messages have nothing to do with an experience because no one wants messages.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, it's very eye-opening, and I really am picking up what you're putting down here. But would love to let's paint a picture of an example of how marketers and companies can move past just executing these campaigns that you're saying, hey, stop just doing that, or just changing up the creative, or doing this, and pushing messages more to providing a contextual customer experience. Like, walk me through an example that you dealt with, or just an idea in your head, or a fake one, or a real one, or whatever. Like, walk us through, like, how would you set this up? Like, hey, okay, Matthew, you sold me. I'm doing everything wrong. Square one. Where do I start? How do I get to the launch? And then how do I continue here?
All right, cool. So let's just break this down real quick. It's a pretty easy roadmap, right? So first off, you either have executive buy-in or you don't, right? So that's number one. If you want to be super successful, you got to have that. Second is you have to have the correct budget. And there's a whole article I've written on budgets, and there's a whole new article that'll be going up in Marketing Props in a week or two about what the new budget should look like and broken down as. Next are tools and tactics, and we know we have to have those, but some people may not have them. After that, it's understanding how to then build these things in an agile framework. So that's all macro theoretical. Let's get very tactical, right? Mm-hmm. So let me give you a couple really good key examples. The Dunkin' Donuts was a great example on that loyalty rewards program. But you can also get much more granular and more simple. Just thinking about, first off, ask your customers, right? And this seems so basic and so simple, but you know how many times I've sat there in a room full of people and asked marketers, I said, raise your hand the last time that you picked up the telephone and called somebody that engaged with your marketing to ask them what they were looking for when they came across it, what they thought of it, and have they found something better. Ask them those three questions. And if you're not asking your customers, who are your actual customers of your marketing, those three questions, how do you expect to build better products in the first place if you're not getting any basic feedback? From there, your customers will direct you as to what to do and what you should do. And then to then get those other things, to get that budget, to get that executive buy-in, you're going to have to work at it. And it's either a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach. It's either getting your CEOs to listen to podcasts like this one and to say, hey, we need to kind of pick this up and change the way that we're structuring our business, or you have to do it from the bottom up. And that means doing really small campaigns. A really good example from Talia. So Talia was extremely progressive in the video marketing space, and they're a B2B organization, right? And the reason I like to pick on B2B organizations is because that everyone says that these new ideas of marketing work great for when you're selling Nikes, but don't work too well in the B2B space, and that's a total lie, right? So Talia is a B2B company, and they sell to the CFOs of very, very, very large companies all around the world. So CFOs, boring people, software to help them get paid faster, boring product. But they use video marketing and a ton of humor. Now, what they did is they proved out in very small tests. They would put up what they thought they wanted to do, and they would test that compared to what their bosses and executives wanted to do, and they would share the results. And when their results won, they were able to then take the next step and do that same idea on a larger scale. So this may start with something as simple as testing out different posts on Facebook or testing out different posts on your blogs and being able to show that your ideas of being more contextual and more customer-centered are actually more powerful than pushing messages and those other things. And that they then give you the leg to stand on to then move forward and do these things in a greater aspect. And so that's kind of the basics of it. I don't know if that's as specific as you'd like, but hopefully
well, no,
that can
but
get
I appreciate you can't get so specific because, you know, I mean, we're looking at a million different snowflakes here. So I get it, but I think you have provided framework, and I would ask you that please do email me that link to that when you put up that other post on marketing process, because I'd like to include that framework, because everything you're saying, you know, I mean, even, you know, logically it makes sense, you know, in my gut it feels right, and then it's a matter of, okay, I just need some help on pointing me in the right direction, and I think you're going to cover that in that other post. So I'd love to include that, but no, I get it, and now it's up to the marketers to, you know, learn their customers, provide these experiences, and just focus on that. And, you know, but then you have your tactical things that you need to worry about, which a lot of people are probably like, well, what about all that stuff? But you mentioned that, but you're putting that kind of as a lower on the totem pole as far as importance here, or where your focus should be. Now, a couple of times you've mentioned here in the power of humor. How much of a belief are you in that? And is it across all marketplaces? Are we looking at, you know, you already mentioned B2B, so in CFOs, that's about, I mean, that's about as boring as you're going to get.
Who doesn't like to laugh?
Right?
Everyone likes to laugh. It's a human emotion. I think the thing that people forget is that they look at customers as customers in a relationship between a business and a customer, where they expect the business to be this polished thing that produces a product and the consumer uses the product. That's not the world. The world is now human to human, right? They are buying things from people, always have bought things from people. Ask any salesperson, and they buy things from people that they like. And so that's the whole point of that we have to kind of keep in mind, is that humor is a human emotion that everyone shares. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't suggest it for everybody, but for one simple reason, is that the majority of people can't pull humor off because committees. If you try to do humor, it's very hard, because you're going to try to put a campaign in front of a committee, and the committee is going to slice and dice all the humor out of it. And that's why humor is very hard for businesses to create. That's why, you know, you have to let marketing do the creative things they want and remove committees from the process many times, and instead instill a theory of testing. Test these ideas on small scales. If they work, scale them up. If they don't do them. But when you start putting things in front of committees or other higher ups inside your organization, and they're the ones determining what you do and don't do, what you end up with is their idea of what works, not actually what works. And those are very different things. And that's just the simple basics of, you know, the fact that they think they know their customers. Actually, that's just narcissism. They don't know their customers, because I can tell you the last time they talked with one and asked them basic questions, I ask it all the time, and it doesn't happen. You know, and market research and all of those things are not the same thing. You can't take an advertisement and put it in front of a group of 20 people and ask them what they think about it and call that research on your, because it's not in the real environment. It's not true. What you should do is just think about this basic idea of Facebook. Facebook gives you the ability to share like 7 different images on a piece of copy. Go in and take the 7 different plans that you have, put them in there, put a couple dollars behind each one, test those theories and ideas, and which one works is the one you should move forward with. There should never be a discussion on that's not going to work for my audience. It should be let's test it and let's see which one works on our audience.
Great point. I mean, yeah, that's such a phenomenal point. I mean, to both. Talk to your customers. Talk to them. Just do it. You know, you're going to get so much information out of them. And then you can test.
Let me give a real specific. Let me get specific on that one, on a how-to on that one, because I know this hasn't been a lot of how-to, and here's a great how-to, right? All you have to do is ask 3 questions. So just do this simply, right? And I'm going to tell you how long it takes and all the steps to it. Next time you launch a piece of content, what you're going to do is you're going to look at 3 people, or you're going to take 9 people in total, 3 that are not in your current life cycle, 3 that are in the current life cycle of the sales and marketing process, and then 3 current customers that have all engaged with this experience or asset. And then you place a phone call out to 3 of each of those, 9 in total. And you ask only 3 questions. The first question is, what were you looking for, or why did you come across this? What were you doing? What were you looking for? What were you trying to find when you came across this? Question 1. Question 2, did you find what you were looking for? Did you find the experience, content, information you were looking for? Number 3 is you have to remember, this isn't the only thing. They were probably searching across lots of websites, and so you need to ask them, did you find something better? Did you find a better experience that met your needs better than what we did? Did you find better information that we provided? If so, what was that? That's it. Those 3 questions, that's it.
Wow.
Take maybe 5 minutes. You ask those 3 things, and here's how long it takes, right? So if you call to get 9 people on the telephone, you're going to have to call about 29 to 30 people just based on the odds of people picking up the telephone and answering it. And that's going to take you about an hour and a half to do this entire process, an hour and a half. And you're going to find out exactly, first off, how people are coming across your experiences, what they're actually wanting to find when they come across yours, what they actually think of the experience you're creating, and who's making a better experience so you know what to do better. I mean, it's very simple, but that's not the way we were trained to think, because marketers aren't trained to pick up the telephone. That's sales' job.
Yeah. No, thank you for that take home. That's phenomenal. I think that one exercise will probably give you more data than 6 months of looking at other stuff, especially for people who aren't versed with, analytics and or don't have a lot of them, don't have a lot of data.
It doesn't take any technology to do it. It's something you already have.
Yeah, and you're going to probably uncover, well, I didn't find you. Well, I did find you, and your review sucked. Oh shit, I didn't realize that. Right? Let me go fix them. I mean, you'd be surprised. Not you, but some people would be surprised at how poor people pay attention to that stuff. My niece is in town right now, and she was interning at some linguistics type of company, and she's like, do you know what happens when people search for you? And she's an intern, and they were like, no. And she's like, you have 1 review, and it's a 1-star review. She's like, this is what people see. And you have your map location. There's no pictures, no anything. They're like, oh my God, I didn't even realize that. So it's crazy, and you might find something simple like that by just putting in a little bit of effort. So yeah, that's awesome. So before I have to let you go, I want to just a couple last points here. I know you've talked a lot about user-generated content, consumer-generated content, how it's growing in practice and importance. So you don't necessarily need to explain user-generated content, but I'd love for you to give a couple examples of people doing this right. How they are accomplishing, because in theory it's like, yes, I would love my consumers to generate content, but how have you seen people make it work and happen right?
Yes, I'm going to flip the script on you. Good question, but I want people to reimagine the word content. Content doesn't mean what you create and put out there. Think about it, instead of creating content, simply engaging with the content that your customers have already made. Not using it to share to others, but simply using it to fulfill the desire that they had by creating it in the first place. Right? So if I go put an image up of myself on my mountain bike, the greatest compliment I can have is the manufacturer of that bike that I love simply liking that photo, because that reinforces my purpose of self-validation and societal validation of thinking that I'm a badass mountain biker by the people that I love the most, the brand who made it. It didn't take anything. And here's the thing, right? That one like breaks through all the other noise, because if you try to then take that content and share it, you're going to have to go through algorithms and news feeds, and you're only going to get to maybe like 2% at most of your audience anyways. So 2% of your audience might take you an hour and a half to simply go through the feed and like a bunch of photos. Does that make sense? And you're fulfilling
it
that.
It does, but how would one have found your mountain bike? How would they have found? How would that company would have found your picture of your mountain bike? Is it like an image search, or did you tag them?
No, I mean, they should. I'm already in their audience because I already follow that brand. So all that brand has to do is go through their audience and look at, you can do hashtag searches. You can just simply pull up people. This may go back into that framework of saying, who are my top customers, and I need to have one engagement with them. So simply pull up one of your top customers, flip through their social feed, and engage with something that is contextual to your relationship.
That's a great
and that's
idea.
a pretty basic idea.
It's I feel like you're like talking down on your phenomenal ideas. These aren't basic ideas. You're just giving people an idea that costs them no money, limited time, because now you know exactly what you need to do. That's going to get you a huge bang for your buck on the emotional, emotional appeal from the person to your brand. I mean, how many times, I know for me, and I've talked to other people feel the same way, and I guess it's because it's still novel and a lot of companies aren't doing it, but when a brand retweets you, not the CEO of the brand or a salesperson of the brand, but when the brand itself likes you or retweets you or does something, I personally still get warm fuzzies. I'm like, oh, that's so neat, I was like, that's so cool, Even when I tag them up.
It fulfills the purpose of what you went onto social media for in the first place.
Yeah.
You went onto social media for self-validation, societal validation. And when you were validated by those people, it fulfills your purpose for being there. And you can't fulfill that purpose by simply forcing content, because nobody goes to social media and says, I want to see content, right?
Yeah. No, that's a great idea. That is such a good idea, Matthew, because that is so actionable. You just go to your followers, go look, and you don't necessarily need to like something if it's about you. You can just like other stuff on them, and then they'll see that and engage, and then reciprocity.
Right. And then think of taking that to the next level, and then mentioning other customers, and then helping build community among your community. Be like, oh my God, this is awesome. Jay so-and-so, did you see this bike? And then you're engaging other people, and that's the whole point of social media.
Absolutely. A brand new idea I'd like to throw in that we're implementing for clients and even like local clients is we're going to have them highlight somebody, one of their clients, like attorney a tax guy that we're working with. We're going to have him highlight a business of one of his clients and have them just talk, hey, what's the secret to your success? Tell us what's your main tip. What do you do every morning? How have you grown your business? And now we're going to be highlighting them, and the idea is that they're going to share, let alone that one customer now is going to become a lifetime customer, right? Each time we do this, they're going to just be like, oh my God, the vanity of having my picture and my words. And people love giving advice. People don't really realize that. People love to help. It's just ingrained. I've read this multiple times in psychology. People love to help, and if you highlight them and you let them speak their words, get them involved and they'll share. But that's a little bigger program, and there takes a lot of time and effort. Matthew's ideas are something you can start doing this second, and I hadn't thought about that. So it's anything but a basic idea. I think it's very ingenuitive and very actionable. I love it. Well, Matthew, I think we've run out of time. But before I let you go, there's one last thing I had to ask. I think it's a quick question. Models versus metrics. You're saying marketers need to be measured in both models rather than metrics. Can you touch on that real quick?
Oh, yeah. All right. This is a massive conversation, but essentially the difference is a metric is ROI. ROI is a metric that is a lagging indicator. It doesn't tell you how to be better. It's a horrible metric for measuring the value of marketing efforts, right? And so when we talk about values and we talk about models are things that, first off, a model helps you see something that is, it helps you understand something, and it gives you a prescription on how to fix it, whereas a metric is just a flashing red light. And so the best example, there's a whole lot I write on this, and there's a whole lot coming out about this in the future, but essentially my suggestions are, one, we need to look at better metrics and models for showing value. Because that's the problem that marketing has, right? The crux to all of this is how do we show the value of marketing to allow us to do more of it and what we want to do rather than what we're being told to do. So what we're being told to do, make more messages, put more stuff out that doesn't work. So if we can show the value of what we actually want and the metrics and models, the model I believe is called weighted pipeline. And it's a model, not a metric. The metrics that it produces are volume, efficiency, and predictability. So that's kind of just the short 2 cents on that. So Google weighted pipeline, that's a metric. That's a model, not a metric.
Google weighted pipeline. Gotcha. Awesome. Well, Matthew, this was a blast. How can people continue to learn from you, as it seems like there's still a ton to learn from you?
Yeah, on Twitter, I'm M. Sweezey, and if you read that, it's Miss Sweezey on Twitter, and then share a lot of stuff on SlideShare. So if you want to get deeper, I make a lot of presentations designed specifically for SlideShare. And then the first book I wrote was called Marketing Automation for Dummies. And then I've got a new book coming out next year, which is it's called The Context Revolution, which is being published by Harvard Business Press.
Awesome. And for the listeners, it's MSWEEZEY. All right, Mathew, until next time, appreciate your time.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.